It really seems like the Artemis program just can't catch a break. As many of you are aware, the Office of Inspector General, or the Office of Audits as it is also known, came out with a review as to the management of the Artemis missions, and a lot of its conclusions have proven to be pretty cynical in my opinion, and that's putting it lightly. In summary, the Office of Inspector General has concluded that Artemis is not going to make up for its timetable. It's not going to meet any of the projected deadlines, and this whole mission is likely to be delayed for as long as 3 years beyond 2025. In other words, we're looking at the 2028 date that NASA was looking at before President Trump and Vice President Pence set the new and far more aggressive date of 2024. This conclusion, or rather this report, shows that this date is unrealistic. And of course, it's already been admitted that that was unrealistic by pushing the date until 2025. A lot of people are talking about Blue Origin's 6-month delay and the problems with SLS, etc. But this report's real focus, the one that nobody is really talking about, is their anticipation that Lunar Starship is likely to be delayed 3.2 years beyond the time that it's expected to be ready. That's right, we're not just looking at a delay of months here, we're looking at a delay of several years. And the vast majority of the attention is being focused on the human landing system. And I must agree, this whole process was started very late in the game. The first proposals for HLS were taken just a couple of years ago. Lunar Starship was accepted just a few months ago, and then all the legal BS took 6 months to resolve. So under normal circumstances, I would say that an 8-year development time or 7-year development time would be reasonable. It's also completely contrary to the type of innovation and the type of sense of urgency that existed during the days of Apollo. So are we saying that SpaceX is incapable of delivering the same kind of sense of urgency? Furthermore, are we saying that NASA has completely lost their ability to deliver a product on time or anywhere close to on time? Well, although Starliner would certainly indicate that, I don't think that's necessarily the case with SLS. As a matter of fact, I think this entire report is completely cynical, overly pessimistic, and lacking in a lot of specific details to make such bold claims. My name is Jordan Wright. I was born in the same year that the human race took its first steps on the surface of another world, and then we promptly betrayed those people's legacy by never going back. But now, over half a century later, there's a new breed of pioneers that are seeking to finish what these people set out to do so long ago. But there is trouble as well, so it's time for commentators like me to stop being polite and start getting angry. What pisses me off the most about this report is the expectation that there's going to be delays, substantial delays, giving these contractors a pass, so to speak, to kind of slow down, take it easy, because after all, you're not really expecting us to have things ready by these dates, are you? They're completely unrealistic. The sense of urgency that we had during the time of Apollo simply does not not exist, because during the Apollo missions, we were competing against the Soviet Union, and it was widely believed that the Soviet Union was days or months away from landing on the surface of the moon, and we absolutely had to beat them at all costs. A similar sense of urgency doesn't seem to exist because the Chinese are not projected to land on the moon until 2030. That having been said, the very first assertions of this plan have me angry already. First of all, quote, "We estimate NASA will be ready to launch by summer 2022 rather than November 2021 as planned. Though Artemis 2 is scheduled to launch in late 2023, we project that it will be delayed until at least mid-2024 due to the mission's reuse of Orion components from Artemis 1. In other words, because we're reusing something, it's going to take longer. Sounds like it's something being written by somebody who doesn't want to reuse things. I almost sense an agenda there, but nevertheless, we'll go on further. Now, as far as the summer 2022 date is concerned, this audit does have a few things to point to justify its conclusions. First of all, the green run, which took place on April 27th, 2021, was nearly 3 months after the intended date. I expressed a great deal of anger about this particular event, by the way, and released a pretty popular video about it. However, they've talked about this particular issue, COVID-19, multiple weather events, and the 10 months required for integration and testing. However, the 10 months required for integration and testing is actually already in process and is supposed to be completed by February. So we're not talking about another 10 months on top of the 3 months of delay that have already transpired. These 10 months are actually on schedule. On top of that, they're scheduling an HEOMD schedule risk analysis. They're citing that as a reason. Once again, that risk analysis is in process. And an SRA risk-informed launch readiness, once again, in process. All of these things are pointing towards a mid-April 2022 date at the latest. But here's a quote from the report that simply pisses me off. Quote, "Following a planned month of engine refurbishment and travel by barge from Stennis Space Center, the core stage arrived at Kennedy on April 27, 2021, nearly 3 months after the intended date. As a result of these delays, the COVID-19 pandemic, multiple weather events, and the 10 months required for integration and testing, Artemis 1 will not be ready to launch until at least February 2022, which is what NASA has said, by the way, 3 months after its ABC launch readiness date. EGS program schedules and a June 2021 HEOMD schedule risk analysis cite a risk-informed launch readiness date of mid-April 2022, and then they go on to say, in our judgment, the agency is on track to launch Artemis 1 by summer 2022. What the... The report goes on to contradict itself by saying, quote, "While first-time integration issues may cause additional delays, NASA currently reports no remaining major issues. Specifically, flight and ground software are at a mature state and require only minor modifications. The core stage passed its first hot fire test, and an issue with a redundant component in one of Orion's 6 power and data units was waived for Artemis 1. So there are no major barriers at all, and the rocket is fully stacked. As a matter of fact, it's going to be rolled out for the press, the fully stacked model, next month. So really, what the hell is supposed to be causing this 6-month delay until summer of 2022? These mysterious weather issues? Well, after research, I've discovered that the hurricane season for Florida doesn't start until June of 2022. So here's the reality. If Artemis 1 was indeed delayed until summer of 2022 and NASA is just hiding this fact from us, then they would be unstacking SLS right now. It's not good to leave the solid rocket boosters stacked for that length of time, let alone the rest of the rocket. But instead, as you can see, they've placed the Orion on top of the rest of the stack, and they're preparing to roll it out of the hangar. Now, perhaps they're going to roll it out of the hangar for a photo opportunity and then take it back in and unstack it. But somehow I doubt it. Somehow I think that NASA is determined to get this thing off the ground by February, maybe March, certainly not by summer. And here's an unrelated commitment that I'm going to make to all of you guys as far as Starship is concerned. Lest it be said that the FAA saved my butt as far as eating a Boeing Hat is concerned, if Starship launches in January of 2022, I will eat a portion of a Boeing Hat. That is to say, right after the FAA pulls the trigger, if Starship gets off the ground in that 30 days, I will eat a portion of a Boeing Hat. That's how confident I am that the most powerful rocket in history is not quite as close to launch as we might think it is. Now, February or March? Maybe. January? No. Now, if this report is cynical about Artemis 1, take cover because Artemis 2 is on its way. The problems expressed in Artemis 1 are only compounded in Artemis 2. This report is not a big fan of reusing components. It asserts that there's going to be a lot of problems in reusing non-core avionics systems, driven entirely by when the Orion capsule returns from its first mission, by the way, and since the first mission's going to be returning 7 months late, or so they claim, that's going to delay Artemis 2. On top of that, the service module for Orion, which is delivered by the European Space Agency, is arriving late. That is October 2021, or a month ago. So even though it slipped, it's here and we can get working on it now. And of course, COVID-19 is being brought up again. One thing that really pisses me off about the whole COVID issue is the fact that NASA has been using better protocols when it comes to COVID than any other government agency on the planet. Everybody is inoculated at NASA. There are very strict restrictions in place in NASA as far as COVID is concerned. If there's an organization that's going to be significantly disrupted by COVID as far as governmental organizations are concerned, NASA would be at the bottom of my list. So let's just go ahead and disrupt some vague threats from COVID as a major reason that Artemis is going to be delayed here. A legitimate delay is the fact that Orion is going to require an environmental control and life support system on the capsule. They're not going to have that on Artemis 1. Artemis 1 intends to utilize the Orion capsule in terms of changing its orbit, testing its maneuverability, testing its ability to modify orbits, essentially to put the capsule through its paces without people on board. Whereas Artemis 2 is going to have astronauts. What this means is Artemis 2 will be the first test of the NASA life support system as far as Orion is concerned for astronauts. This presents an operational and safety risk, as the auditing report suggests. And I tend to agree with this, but if we had operated under the same restrictions during the time of Apollo, or hell, even the space shuttle program, we never would have gotten these things off the ground. The space shuttle flew with 2 astronauts, having never tested its environmental system before. Yes, it presents an operational and safety risk, but that's why we're doing an orbital test to begin with. In addition, on Artemis 2, the Orion capsule will orbit the Earth several times while the systems are tested exhaustively before it makes its way to the moon, unlike Artemis 3. Consequently, if there are significant problems with the life support system, the capsule can be brought down at far less risk to the crew than Apollo 13. So I think, honestly, that this report is overreacting. But here's the last thing about this damn report that really gets under my skin, and that's its claims about the human landing system, or namely Lunar Starship. And it cites this particular graph to illustrate just how long it takes to develop programs utilizing private companies based on the Commercial Crew Program. As you can see, the Cargo Dragon came in about 2 years after SpaceX said it would, whereas the Orbital Cargo, which I believe is the Cygnus, came in pretty much when it was supposed to. The Boeing Crew, let's not talk about that, shall we? And then the SpaceX Crew Dragon, well, that came in a couple of years after they said it would, and their original estimates were about 7 years. And the SLS, well, all of us know that that's taken a ridiculous amount of time. So really, the only thing that we have to go on is the SpaceX Crew in terms of accurately estimating how long it would take to develop a crew-rated vessel that could land on the lunar surface. There are some important differences, however. First of all, Elon Musk was not investing billions of dollars of his own money in the development of Crew Dragon. Granted, he was putting some of his own money into it, but for the most part, this was a project that was being paid for by NASA. Number 2, Crew Dragon was not the main focus of SpaceX. This is not Elon's dream vehicle that's going to take the human race to Mars. If Lunar Starship doesn't work, then Starship doesn't work. So he has a huge amount of incentive to not only move quickly, but also invest a substantial amount of his own revenue in the expense of this vehicle. So comparing Starship to SpaceX Crew is like comparing oranges to apples in my view. However, in spite of this program estimates that the human landing system could face up to 3.4 years of delays. Consequently, since we're looking at a 2025 landing date right now, they're claiming it's going to be more like 2028. And I think that's a load of bullshit. And although I suppose it's legitimate to include the Starliner in estimating these delays, it's really taking the worst project in NASA's history as far as I know, and throwing it in with the numbers of a lot of other far more successful projects. Boeing Crew actually has a longer delay than SLS. Much longer. SLS is about 9 years, whereas Boeing Crew is 12 years. Absolutely ridiculous. So if you throw those kinds of numbers into your calculations, your average of 3.4 years is just going to be skewed. The SpaceX Cargo, by the way, was a 6-year development time with a 4-year estimated time when they first started out. In my opinion, if SpaceX puts all of their effort into Starship, they can accomplish this in 4 years, especially given that they're already working on it and preparing for an orbital flight in the next few months. Now, the report also suggests a necessity for a lunar gateway. It claims that if a lunar gateway is not in place by the time Artemis 3 continues, there won't be a communications relay for the astronauts, assuming that they land on the lunar poles. This is a serious operational problem. However, the new plans seem to indicate that the Falcon Heavy is going to be dropping off the first two components of the Lunar Gateway, therefore making it operational by March of 2025. And even pessimistic estimates are saying September 2025, which falls into the 2025 launch date requirements. Now, the final thing about this report that gets me really angry is the cost estimate requirements. Now, I have often said that SLS is too expensive, expendable rockets are too expensive, but the whole claim that NASA is seriously underestimating the cost of Artemis, well, let's see just how bad it is. Phase 1 of Artemis is $7 billion or so for 2021, $6.6 billion for 22, $6.6 billion for 23, $5.4 billion for 24, $2.2 billion in 25, for a total of $27,971 million. That sounds like a hell of a lot, right? Well, the sustainment cost for the F-35 air superiority fighter is $1.3 trillion, which represents an increase of more than $150 billion since the program was rebaselined in 2012. $150 billion over budget. That's enough to pay for 6 flights to the moon. Artemis 1, 2, and 3, 6 times over. So NASA doesn't represent the worst offender when it comes to the government wasting money. Not even close. So as far as I'm concerned, if this program goes a little over budget, big deal. There should be actions taken to reduce costs, to make space more affordable, to make it more accessible, to make it more reusable. But the fact of the matter is, the goals, the rewards of going back to the moon, of expanding out into the solar system, of making the human species multiplanetary are far greater than the benefits that we reap from one class of air superiority fighter. If you like what I have to say, if you want to see more content like this, you know how to support me. It's all in the description. I could certainly use more Patreon supporters, or just a like and subscribe, and I will be very grateful. So until NASA and the government realizes that what they are doing right now can be expected to be over cost, and while they should do everything they can to fix these problems, they should also recognize that what they're doing matters, and what they are spending is worth the money invested. I urge all of you to stay angry about space.